I will never forget the day my only son told me I was a disgrace to the family. It was on my 67th birthday that Leo looked me straight in the eye and said, "You're a disappointment, Mother." I had just revealed that I had sold my home, the last tangible connection to my late husband, to pay off the debts my son was hiding from his wife. What I didn't know then was that this final sacrifice for him would also be my most profound liberation. But before I continue, make sure you're subscribed to the channel and leave a comment telling us where you're watching this video from. We love to know how far our stories travel. My name is Eleanor, I am 67 years old, and for decades I lived for my son, Leo. My husband passed away when Leo was just 16, leaving me with the sole mission of raising our only child. I worked double shifts as a nurse, saved every possible penny, and postponed my own dreams so that Leo could attend the best schools. I never regretted the sacrifices. Every sleepless night, every skipped meal, every year without a vacation, it all seemed worthwhile when I saw my son graduate with honors in finance. The pride I felt that day was indescribable. I genuinely believed I had fulfilled my role as a mother. Life moved on. Leo met Sophia at a corporate event. She was dazzling, ambitious, and from an influential family. Their wedding was an elegant affair, and I saved for months to buy a suitable dress. I still remember the comment Sophia made when she saw me. "Oh, how adorable. You've managed to find something very appropriate for the occasion." The condescending tone didn't escape me, but I swallowed it, just as I had swallowed so many other small humiliations over the years. The first signs of trouble emerged when Leo and Sophia bought a house they clearly couldn't afford. 4 bedrooms, a swimming pool, in an exclusive neighborhood. "It's an investment, Mom," Leo explained with that confidence that always made me believe him. "We'll be fine." 6 months later, Leo appeared at the door of my small apartment with dark circles under his eyes and a dejected look on his face. He'd lost his job 2 months prior. He hadn't told Sophia because she was organizing a trip to Rome, and he didn't want to spoil her happiness. "She doesn't know we're drowning in debt," he confessed, his voice trembling. "If we lose the house, she'll leave me." The desperation in his eyes broke my heart. It was at that moment that I made the decision that would change our lives. I offered to sell the only valuable thing I still owned, the small house I had inherited from my husband. It was the last tangible piece of the life we had built together, filled with memories of laughter, tears, and love. "No, Mom, I can't accept it," Leo said, but the weak resistance in his voice revealed that his heart had already accepted. "It's just a house," I replied with a smile that hid my pain. "What matters are people, not things." The sale was quick. The money, $280,000, was transferred directly to Leo's account, enough to pay off a significant portion of their mortgage and give him some breathing room until he found a new job. In the following months, I noticed subtle changes in Leo and Sophia's behavior. The visits, which were already rare, became almost non-existent. When I called, the conversations were short and rushed. The few times they invited me to dinner, Sophia made sure to show off her new acquisitions: a set of Italian sofas, paintings by emerging artists, state-of-the-art appliances. Robert's mother, my colleague from the club, just gave her son an imported car, Sophia commented during one of those dinners, looking directly at me. Some mothers really know how to help their children maintain a certain standard. Leo just lowered his eyes to his plate, avoiding my gaze. His silence hurt more than her words. Meanwhile, I had moved into a small rented apartment, carefully calculating every expense. My nurse's pension was modest, and now, without the rental income from the house I had sold, I needed to be even more careful with my money. Then came my 67th birthday. I waited all day for a call from Leo. At 7 in the evening, when I had already lost hope, my phone rang. It was him, inviting me to a surprise dinner. "Sophia prepared something special for you," he said with an enthusiasm that seemed forced. I put on my best clothes, a navy blue outfit I saved for special occasions, and took a taxi to their house. When I arrived, Leo greeted me with a quick, awkward hug. Sophia appeared shortly after, flawless in a red dress that probably cost more than 3 months of my rent. "Happy birthday, Eleanor," she said with that cold smile that never reached her eyes. "I prepared grilled sea bass. I hope you like it." The table was beautifully set with fine china that I knew was a family heirloom of Sophia's. Crystal glasses reflected the soft light of scented candles. Everything was impeccable, calculated, perfect, and completely devoid of warmth. During dinner, we talked about superficial topics: the weather, the new gym Sophia was attending, the neighbor's dog that barked too much. Then Leo cleared his throat and exchanged a meaningful look with his wife. "Mother," he began hesitantly, "we have a special request to make of you." The look between Leo and Sophia contained something that chilled me to the bone. It was a mixture of determination and shame, as if they were about to do something unpleasant but necessary. I felt my heart race as I poured more wine into my glass, seeking liquid courage to face what was to come. "We're thinking of starting our own business," Leo continued, his voice gaining confidence with each word. "A financial consulting firm. We already have some potential clients, but we need an initial investment. Something around $90,000, Sophia added, looking directly at me with that calculated smile I knew so well. "We believe you could help us, since you must have saved something from the sale of the house." The glass almost slipped from my fingers. The money from the sale had been transferred in its entirety to Leo. I hadn't kept a single cent. I looked at my son, expecting him to clarify the misunderstanding, but he just avoided my gaze, suddenly fascinated by the pattern on his napkin. "Leo," I began carefully, "you know all the money from the sale went to you to pay off the house debts." A heavy silence fell over the table. Sophia turned slowly to Leo, her smile disappearing like ice in the sun. "What is she talking about?" she asked in a sharp voice. "What sale money? What debts?" In that moment, I realized my terrible mistake. Leo had never told Sophia about the money, about losing his job, or about the debts that had nearly cost them the house, about my sacrifice. "Leo had some difficulties a few months ago," I explained, trying to soften the blow. "He lost his job, and you were behind on the mortgage payments. I sold my house to help." Sophia's face transformed into a mask of contained fury. "He lost his job? When exactly did that happen?" "About 8 months ago," I replied, realizing too late that I was only digging Leo into a deeper hole. "8 months?" Sophia repeated slowly, as if savoring each bitter syllable. "And where are the $280,000 from the sale of the house, Leo?" My son finally looked up. His face was pale, a thin layer of sweat shining on his forehead. "I used it to pay the overdue installments, to settle some credit cards, to finance my trip to Rome?" Sophia finished, her voice rising dangerously. "To buy that Swiss watch you said was a work bonus? To renovate the kitchen you insisted we could afford?" Leo didn't answer. There was no possible answer. Sophia stood up abruptly, knocking over her glass. The red wine spread across the white tablecloth like blood. "I'm going to my room." "Don't follow me," she said before storming out like a hurricane, leaving only the echo of her high heels on the wooden floor. I was left alone with my son in the dining room, surrounded by the wreckage of what should have been my birthday celebration. Leo ran his hands over his face in a gesture that painfully reminded me of when he was a child and had done something wrong. "Why did you do that?" he finally asked, his voice low but loaded with accusation. "Why did you have to tell her?" The injustice of the question hit me like a slap. "I didn't know it was a secret," I replied, feeling a slow anger begin to build. "You never said you were lying to your wife about where the money came from." "I wasn't lying," he protested weakly. "I was just omitting some details until I could fix everything." "And how did you plan to fix it? By asking me for more money? Money I don't have?" Leo stood up and began pacing the room like a caged animal. "I was going to get it. The consulting firm is a real idea. We have promised contacts. In a few months, we could be earning enough to what, Leo? To maintain a life based on lies? To continue pretending you can afford a lifestyle that is clearly beyond your means? He stopped abruptly and faced me. His eyes, so similar to his father's, were hard and cold. What do you know about means, Mother? You've always lived a mediocre life, content with crumbs, never aspiring to anything better. His words struck me like poisoned arrows, precise and fatal. I felt the air leave my lungs. For a moment, I couldn't breathe. Is that what you think of me? I finally asked, my voice little more than a whisper. That my life was mediocre? Look around you. He gestured widely. This is the life we want. A beautiful house, international travel, social respect. I don't want to end up like you, counting coins to pay the rent on a tiny apartment. In that moment, something inside me broke. It wasn't just my heart. It was the image I had of my son, of the man I thought I had raised. I looked at him as if he were a stranger. Do you think my life was mediocre because I never had a house like this? I asked, feeling a sudden clarity. Do you know what's mediocre, Leo? Lying to your wife, wasting your mother's sacrifice, valuing things over people. I stood up slowly, my legs steadier than I expected. I'm leaving now. My birthday gift to myself will be not having to hear another word from you tonight. As I walked to the door, I heard Sophia coming down the stairs. She had changed out of the red dress into casual clothes and was carrying a small suitcase. I'm going to my sister's, she announced, ignoring Leo completely and addressing me. And as for you, Eleanor, you should have told me. Women like us need to look out for each other when we're dealing with men like him. Before I could respond, she left, slamming the door hard. Leo remained motionless like a statue of salt, staring at the empty space where his wife had been. See what you did? He muttered, finally turning his gaze to me. There was something despicable in his expression, something that made me instinctively recoil. You're a disgrace to this family, a disappointment as a mother. The words hung in the air between us, impossible to take back. I felt a single tear roll down my face, but I didn't allow myself to shed any more. Instead, I straightened my shoulders and looked directly into the eyes of the man who was once my little boy. The disgrace is yours, Leo, and the disappointment is mine. I walked out into the cold night without looking back, not knowing that this terrible moment would be the beginning of my deepest liberation. The taxi took me back to my small apartment, and I walked inside feeling the weight of my 67 years like never before. The city lights flickered through my window, indifferent to the emotional earthquake that had just shaken my world. I sat in the worn-out armchair I had rescued from our old home, one of the few pieces I brought with me, and finally let the tears flow freely. A disgrace, I repeated to myself, feeling each syllable like a small blade. Leo's words echoed in my mind, mixing with other cruel phrases he had said over the years that I had chosen to ignore. How could I have been so blind? How did I not realize I was raising someone capable of such ingratitude? That night, I couldn't sleep. I replayed every decision, every sacrifice, every moment I put Leo's needs above my own. I remembered turning down a promotion at the hospital because it would require occasional travel, leaving Leo alone for a few days. I remembered giving up a promising relationship with a widowed doctor because Leo, then a teenager, was jealous and hostile. I remembered using my retirement savings to pay for the private university he insisted on attending. The morning found me exhausted with dark circles under my eyes, but strangely calm. Something had changed during that sleepless night. A quiet resolution had formed within me, like a crystal slowly solidifying in a saturated solution. As I was making coffee, the phone rang. It was Claire, my old friend from nursing school. We hadn't spoken in almost a year, another relationship I had neglected in favor of always being available for Leo. Eleanor. Happy belated birthday, she exclaimed with that contagious energy I always admired. I tried calling you yesterday, but it went to voicemail. Thanks, Claire. I replied, surprised at how hoarse my voice sounded after a night of crying. It was an unforgettable birthday. There was a pause on the other end of the line. Claire always had a keen intuition for when something was wrong. "What happened?" she asked simply. And then, like a dam, finally giving way under pressure, I told her everything. About selling the house, about Leo's lies, about the cruel words exchanged the night before. Claire listened in silence, occasionally murmuring words of support. "You know what's strangest?" I concluded, feeling a deep weariness. A part of me feels relieved, as if a weight has been lifted from my shoulders. "Because it has," Claire replied firmly. "The weight of living for someone else, the weight of sacrificing your own happiness for someone who doesn't appreciate it." Her words were harsh, but true. I felt a lump in my throat. "What do I do now, Claire? I'm 67 years old. It's too late to... For what? I don't even know what I want anymore. It's never too late to start living your own life," she replied with conviction. "And I have something to tell you that might be exactly what you need to hear right now." Claire then shared some surprising news. She had received an invitation to participate in a volunteer nursing program in Italy, in the Tuscany region. The program was specifically looking for retired nurses with experience in geriatric care, exactly my specialty for the last 15 years of my career. They offer accommodation, small stipend, and most importantly, the chance to see a new country while doing something meaningful, she explained, barely containing her excitement. "I was going to invite you to come with me as a travel companion, but now I'm inviting you because I think you should really sign up, too." "Italy?" I repeated, the idea seeming both absurd and strangely tempting. "But I've never left the country. I don't even have a passport." "So what? It's never too late to get one," Claire replied with a laugh. "The program starts in 3 months, more than enough time to get everything organized." After hanging up, I sat at the kitchen table, looking out the window at the gray winter morning sky. Italy, the land of my maternal grandparents, whom I never knew, the land my mother told wonderful stories about when I was a child, a place that had always existed in my imagination as a distant, impossible dream. As I contemplated this unexpected possibility, my phone vibrated with a message. It was Leo. "We need to talk. I'm coming over." My stomach clenched. A part of me wanted to refuse, to say I wasn't ready to see him. But another part, perhaps the mother who would never completely cease to exist, wanted to believe he was coming with a sincere apology. I simply replied, "I'll be here." An hour later, the doorbell rang. I opened it to find Leo, looking more put together than the night before, but with red, swollen eyes. Without a word, I gestured for him to enter. He sat on the sofa, looking around as if noticing for the first time how small and modest my place was. I sat in the armchair opposite him, maintaining a physical distance that reflected the emotional chasm between us. "Sophia's gone," he began, his voice low. "She said she needs time to think about whether she still wants to be married to me." I didn't respond. There was nothing to say. "Everything is falling apart," he continued, running his hands through his hair in a nervous gesture. "And I don't know where to start to fix it. Perhaps," I suggested gently, "you should start by being honest, with yourself and with others." Leo looked up, meeting my gaze for the first time. "It's more complicated than that, Mom. You don't understand the pressure I feel, the expectations." "What expectations, Leo? Yours? Sophia's? Certainly not mine." He laughed bitterly. "No, never yours. You've always been content with so little, always living as if you were afraid to ask for more from life." His words hit me again, but this time, instead of pain, I felt a crystal clarity. I saw my son as he truly was, a man trapped in a distorted vision of success, unable to find satisfaction in what he had, always chasing more, more, more. "Do you know what's ironic?" I commented, keeping my voice calm. "You see me as someone who settled for little, who was afraid to live fully. But the truth is, I consciously chose what was important to me. I chose to be a full-time mother after your father died. I chose to prioritize your education and well-being. They were never choices based on fear, Leo. They were choices based on love. He looked away, uncomfortable with my words. And now, I continued, feeling a growing strength within me, I'm making a new choice, a choice for myself. I'm going to Italy, I announced with a firmness that surprised us both. The words once spoken hung in the air between us like a declaration of independence. Leo looked at me as if I had just said I was planning a trip to Mars. His mouth opened and closed several times before he could form a response. Italy? What are you talking about? Is this some kind of joke? It's not a joke, I replied calmly, realizing I truly meant it. The idea that had seemed so absurd just an hour ago was now solidifying into a concrete decision. Claire invited me to participate in a volunteer nursing program in Tuscany. I'm going to accept. Leo stood up abruptly as if he needed some physical action to process what he was hearing. You can't just leave, he protested. You've never traveled alone. You've never been out of the country. You're 67 years old, for God's sake. It's precisely because I'm 67 that I need to go, I replied, keeping my voice steady despite the emotional storm inside me. How many more years will I have? How much time do I have left to have new experiences, to see other places, to do something meaningful besides living for you? The last words came out more bitterly than I intended, but they were true. Leo recoiled as if I had slapped him. So that's it? He asked, his voice rising. One fight, a few harsh words, and you decide to abandon your family? Abandon your own son? I felt a wave of indignation course through me. Abandon? Leo, you're 40 years old. You have your own house, your own life. I'm not abandoning anyone. For once, finally, I'm choosing to live my life. And what about family is forever? What about mothers always put their children first? Were those just empty words? I took a deep breath, searching for patience. Family is forever, yes, and I'll still be your mother wherever I am. But that doesn't mean I have to sacrifice my final years to be permanently available for you. Leo ran his hand over his face, a gesture that mixed frustration and disbelief. This is about last night, isn't it? Because of what I said when I was angry. I didn't mean it, you know. You're not a disgrace or a disappointment. I was just upset. It's not just about last night, I replied, feeling a deep sadness. It's about every day of the last 20 years. It's about how our relationship became a one-way street where I give and you take. It's about how I lost track of who I am beyond being your mother. I walked to the window, looking out without really seeing anything. You know, I barely remember the person I was before. The Eleanor who loved to read poetry at night. The Eleanor who dreamed of seeing the Mediterranean Sea. The Eleanor who wanted to learn to paint watercolors. Where did she go? I turned to face him, feeling a strange mix of pain and liberation. She got lost in you, Leo, in taking care of you, in living for you, in sacrificing everything for you. And now I need to find her again, before it's too late. Leo looked at me with an expression that was hard to decipher, a mix of shock, indignation, and perhaps a flicker of understanding. What if you need me? He finally asked, his voice softer. What if you get sick over there? What if something happens to you? For a moment, I thought I detected genuine concern in his voice, but then I realized he was worried about himself, about who would take care of him if I wasn't available. I'm sure you'll survive, Leo, I replied dryly, just as I survived raising a son alone, burying a husband, working double shifts, and selling my house to save yours. He lowered his eyes, finally silenced by the undeniable truth of my words. I'm not doing this to punish you, I added more gently. I'm doing this for me, because if I don't do it now, I'm afraid I'll never have the courage again. In the following days, my decision only strengthened. I called Claire and confirmed my interest in the program. She was ecstatic and helped me with the application forms, highlighting my experience in geriatric care and my basic fluency in Italian, a plus for working in Italy. Leo didn't contact me again that week. Sophia, however, appeared unexpectedly at my door 3 days later. She looked different, less polished, more human. Without the perfect makeup and high heels, dressed simply in jeans and a plain blouse, she reminded me more of the young woman Leo had introduced to me years ago. "Can I come in?" she asked timidly, so different from the confident, sometimes arrogant Sophia I knew. I gestured for her to enter and offered her coffee, which she accepted with a whispered thank you. We sat at the kitchen table, an uncomfortable silence hanging between us. "Leo told me," she finally said, "about Italy." I nodded, expecting criticism or attempts to convince me to stay. Instead, she surprised me. "I think you should go," she declared, meeting my eyes for the first time. "I think you deserve it after everything." I was so surprised I couldn't formulate an immediate response. Sophia continued, the words tumbling out like a long-held confession. "I never really gave you a chance," she admitted, her fingers nervously playing with the handle of her cup. "From the beginning, I saw you as an obstacle." The overprotective mother who couldn't cut the cord. I swallowed, absorbing her words. They weren't easy to hear, but I appreciated her brutal honesty. "The truth is, I was jealous," she continued, surprising me even more. "Jealous of the love Leo had for you, of the security he had in knowing you would always be there, no matter what. My parents were never like that. They always made it clear that their love was conditional on my success, on my achievements. For the first time, I felt a pang of compassion for Sophia. Behind the perfect facade was an insecure girl desperately seeking approval and unconditional love. "And now?" I asked gently. "You and Leo?" She shrugged, a strangely vulnerable gesture. "I don't know, we're talking. He's different, more honest, maybe, more willing to admit his mistakes. It's a start." When Sophia left, I found myself thinking about our conversation. It was strange how life turned out. The woman I had for years considered cold and distant had just shown me a side of herself I never imagined existed. That brief moment of vulnerability created a connection between us that years of formal dinners and superficial conversations had failed to establish. In the following days, I immersed myself in preparations for my trip. I'd never had a passport, and the process seemed daunting for a 67-year-old woman who rarely left her own city. But Claire, with her characteristic energy, guided me through every step. Together, we navigated the bureaucracy, filled out forms, and took official photos, in which, to my surprise, I didn't look as old as I feared. Finally, 3 weeks later, I held in my hands the small blue booklet that represented my first real freedom. My application to the program was accepted with enthusiasm. Apparently, nurses with my experience in geriatrics were rare and valuable, especially those willing to work as volunteers. The program would cover my accommodation in a small apartment shared with Claire, plus provide a modest monthly stipend for food and basic needs. It wouldn't be luxurious, but it would be enough. With every concrete step I took towards Italy, I felt a mix of terror and euphoria. Terror of the unknown, of the risk, of the sheer scale of the change. Euphoria for the possibility, for the adventure, for the chance to rediscover who I was beyond the roles I had played for decades. Leo came to see me again just 2 weeks before my departure. He showed up unannounced, carrying a cardboard box. "These are some things I thought you might want to take," he explained when I opened the door, his tone cautious, as if he were testing the ground between us. I accepted the box and invited him in. Inside, I found old photo albums, some simple jewelry that had belonged to my mother, and letters my husband had written to me during our courtship. Items I had left behind in the house I sold, which Leo had apparently kept all this time without telling me. "Thank you," I murmured, moved by the unexpected gesture. We sat on the small sofa. Another awkward silence settled between us. Leo looked different, thinner, with a nascent beard he would never have allowed in his days as an impeccable executive. He wore simple clothes instead of the expensive suits he used to wear even on informal occasions. "How are things?" I finally asked. "Different," he replied, running a hand through his slightly longer than usual hair. "Sophia came back home. We're talking a lot. About money, mostly, about expectations, about how we built our life on foundations we couldn't sustain." I nodded, encouraging him to continue. "I got a job," he said, a slight blush coloring his cheeks. "It's nothing like what I had before. I'm working as an assistant manager at an office supply store. The salary is less than half of what I used to make. But it's honest. It's a start." I felt an unexpected surge of pride. It was the first job Leo had gotten on his own, without using contacts or my financial help to sustain him while he searched for the ideal position. "We're also selling the house," he continued, avoiding my gaze. "It's too big, too expensive. We found a smaller apartment in a simpler neighborhood. Sophia is getting used to the idea." I couldn't help a small smile. The universe had a peculiar sense of humor. I had sold my house so they could keep theirs, and now they were giving it up anyway. "I'm proud of you," I said sincerely. "Those aren't easy decisions." Leo looked up, surprised. He clearly expected criticism, not approval. "I came here to ask you not to go," he confessed after a moment. "To tell you I need you here, that it would be easier to start over with your support. But now, sitting here, looking at you, I see something different in your eyes. Something I haven't seen in a very long time." "What?" I asked, curious. "Hope," he replied simply. "You look alive." The morning of my departure arrived with a clear blue sky, as if the universe were smiling on my decision. My few belongings were organized into 2 suitcases, a large one for the plane's hold and a small one to carry with me in the cabin. I revisited my apartment one last time, running my fingers over the familiar surfaces, silently saying goodbye to the space that had been my refuge for the past few years. Claire would arrive in an hour to take me to the airport. We had separate flights, but would arrive in Florence with only a few hours difference. I was flying first, a deliberate decision I made to force myself to navigate alone, at least part of this intimidating journey. I needed to prove to myself that I could do it, that I wasn't completely dependent on anyone. The doorbell rang, pulling me from my thoughts. It was too early to be Claire. I opened the door to find Leo and Sophia, both looking as nervous as I felt. "We came to take you to the airport," Leo said, his tone suggesting he wouldn't take no for an answer. Sophia stepped forward, handing me a small, delicate package. "A farewell gift," she explained, "for you to open when you're on the plane." I accepted the gift with a surprise thank you. We had never exchanged gifts before, not on birthdays or Christmas. It was always Leo who bought something on behalf of both of them, usually something practical and impersonal that clearly lacked Sophia's touch. The drive to the airport was quiet, but not uncomfortably so. It was as if we had all reached a silent truce, a mutual acknowledgement that we were in uncharted territory, trying to navigate a new kind of relationship. At the departure terminal, after checking my luggage and with my boarding pass in hand, the time came for goodbye. I felt a lump in my throat. As determined as I was to follow my new path, there was a sharp pain in saying goodbye to my son. Despite everything, he was my only family. Leo hugged me first, a long, tight hug that took me by surprise. "Forgive me," he whispered in my ear, "for everything." I nodded against his shoulder, unable to speak. When Leo finally let me go, Sophia approached, her eyes also shining with unshed tears. She hugged me too, a shorter but equally sincere embrace. "I'll call when I arrive," I promised, discreetly wiping away a tear. "And you have the apartment's address. You can visit whenever you want." "Maybe next vacation," Leo suggested with a hesitation that showed we were still on shaky ground, rebuilding bridges that had been severely damaged. I walked through the boarding gate without looking back, fearing that if I did, all my courage would vanish. Only when I was seated on the plane, the seatbelt firmly fastened, did I allow myself to open the small package Sophia had given me. It was a journal, bound in soft, navy blue leather. On the first page, written in an elegant script I recognized as Sophia's, was a message. For you to record your adventures, for you to remember who you always were and who you are rediscovering, with gratitude for teaching me that it's never too late. Sophia. The tears I had held back at the airport finally rolled freely. It was the first truly personal gift I had ever received from my daughter-in-law, and it came at the exact moment we were parting, perhaps forever. The flight to Florence was long and uncomfortable, as expected. I slept intermittently, waking up disoriented each time the plane hit turbulence. In the hours I was awake, I alternated between absolute terror of what I was doing and an almost childlike excitement for the adventure unfolding. When we finally landed, my legs were shaking so much, I feared I wouldn't be able to walk down the aisle. I followed the flow of passengers, carried along by the human current through immigration, where my brand new passport was stamped for the first time, and then to the baggage claim area. Following the meticulous instructions Claire had given me, I found the tourist information desk, where I asked for help buying a local SIM card for my phone. The young clerk, noticing my American-accented Italian and my evident disorientation, was exceptionally kind, explaining slowly how to use public transport to get to the small hotel where I would spend the first night, waiting for Claire's arrival. The taxi took me through streets that seemed to be from a dream. Narrow, steep, paved with uneven stones, flanked by old buildings painted in pastel shades, faded by sun and time. Florence was exactly like the photos I had obsessively studied in the preceding weeks, but at the same time, completely different. There was a smell in the air, a mix of cypress, strong coffee, and something indefinably ancient that no photo could capture. My small hotel was in a quiet alley, in a building the taxi driver informed me was over 300 years old. My room was tiny by American standards, but impeccably clean, with a window that opened onto an inner courtyard where laundry formed a colorful clothesline between the buildings. I sat on the bed, suddenly exhausted beyond words. I had done it. I was in Italy, alone, at 67, in a foreign country. The idea was so surreal that I started to laugh, a laugh that quickly turned into tears and then back into laughter. It was as if all the repressed emotions of the past few months were finally finding an escape valve. When the emotional storm passed, I took my new phone and called Leo, as I had promised. It was early morning in the States, but he answered on the first ring, as if he had been waiting by the phone. I arrived. I said simply, "I'm okay." "What's it like?" he asked, his voice hoarse from sleep but clearly interested. "Old," I replied, smiling to myself. "Beautiful, unlike anything I've ever seen." Tomorrow I'm going to explore a bit before Claire arrives. After hanging up, I took a quick shower and fell into bed, sleeping instantly, dreamlessly, the sleep of the utterly exhausted. I woke up disoriented, the unfamiliar room momentarily alarming until the memory returned. I was in Florence. It was my first day in a foreign country. I dressed carefully, choosing comfortable walking clothes that were still presentable. The hotel receptionist, a middle-aged woman named Conchetta, gave me a map and marked some nearby points of interest I could visit on foot. "You will like the Oltrarno," she said with a warm smile. "It's beautiful, and not as many hills as other neighborhoods." With the map firmly in hand, I ventured into the streets of Florence. I walked slowly, stopping frequently to catch my breath on the steep inclines, but determined to absorb every detail. The colorful frescoes on the building facades, the small cafes with sidewalk tables, the clotheslines hanging between windows, the bustling artisan workshops, everything enchanted me. I stopped at a small pasticceria, where I shyly pointed to a cornetto in the display case. The clerk smiled and corrected me kindly. "Here, we call it a brioche." I sat at a small table outside, savoring the sweet pastry and a strong espresso, watching the flow of people, tourists like me, easily identifiable by their cameras and maps, and locals moving with the confidence of someone who knows every stone of those centuries-old streets. Tuscany welcomed me with an embrace of golden light. After 2 days in Florence, Claire and I took a train to the small town where we would be volunteering. The train ride was a revelation. The Italian countryside unfolded before us like a moving painting, green fields gradually giving way to the rolling golden hills of the south, dotted with twisted olive trees and occasional glimpses of distant stone-built farmhouses. Our housing was a small apartment in a 3-story building, a 10-minute walk from the community center where we would work. The apartment was simple but cozy. 2 small bedrooms, a living room that also served as a dining area, and a compact kitchen with all the basic equipment. From the small balcony, we could see a sliver of the rolling hills between the low buildings of the neighborhood. The program officially began the following Monday. Our role would be to offer basic health care and companionship to the elderly who lived alone in the local community. The community center functioned as a meeting point during the day, where the elderly came for meals, social activities, and preventive health consultations. On the first day, we were introduced to our supervisor, Dr. Antonio, a local doctor in his mid-50s who spoke Italian with an accent so different from what I was used to that we had to repeat ourselves several times to understand each other. He introduced us to each of the regular staff and volunteers, and then took us on a guided tour of the facilities. "We have about 50 elderly people who come regularly," he explained as we walked. "Some daily, others only once or twice a week. Most live alone. Their children have moved to other European countries in search of work. It's a growing problem in small Italian communities." That moved me deeply. Despite all the cultural and geographical differences, there was something universal about the experience of aging, about the loneliness that often accompanied that stage of life. That afternoon, I sat at one of the tables in the community dining room, helping an 82-year-old woman named Signora Maria fill out some forms for her medications. Her Italian was very different from mine, filled with regional expressions I had never heard, but somehow we managed to communicate, filling the gaps with gestures and smiles. "You are American, yes?" she asked, her blue eyes faded with age but still shining with curiosity. "Yes," I confirmed. "My grandparents were Italian, but they never told me how beautiful Italy was." She smiled, revealing well-cared-for teeth that I imagined were dentures. "And why did you come here? To visit the land of your grandparents?" I hesitated. How could I explain to a stranger the complex web of events and decisions that had led me there? How could I summarize the sale of my house, my son's cruel words, my late-in-life decision to finally live for myself? "I came to find myself," I finally replied, surprised by my own honesty. Signora Maria nodded, as if my answer made perfect sense. "Sometimes we need to get lost to find ourselves," she said with the simple wisdom of the very old. I also found myself late in life. After my husband died, I thought my life was over, but then I discovered painting. She opened her worn handbag and took out a small sketchbook. I flipped through it carefully and found delicate watercolors of local landscapes: the sea, olive trees, whitewashed houses under the intense blue Tuscan sky. "They're beautiful," I praised sincerely. "I started painting at 70, she revealed with evident pride. I had never picked up a brush before. Now at 82, I sell some of my works at the local craft fair. It's not much money, but it's enough to buy more paints and paper, and to give me a purpose. Her words resonated deeply within me. A purpose. Wasn't that what we were all looking for, regardless of age? Something to make us wake up in the morning with a sense of meaning, with the feeling that our existence mattered? In the following days and weeks, I settled into a comfortable routine. Claire and I worked at the community center 5 mornings a week. In the afternoons, we had free time to explore the region, rest, or participate in social activities with the other volunteers and staff. I started taking long walks in the countryside, something I had rarely done back home. There was something profoundly therapeutic in walking along dusty paths, feeling the warm sun on my skin, the gentle breeze rustling my gray hair. I carried the journal Sophia had given me, writing about my observations, thoughts, and feelings. It was like reconnecting with a part of myself that had been dormant for decades, the part that observed, that reflected, that marveled at the beauty around me. On a particularly sunny Saturday, about a month after our arrival, Claire proposed that we take a short watercolor painting course offered by a local artist. I immediately remembered Signora Maria's paintings and how that new hobby had transformed her later years. I always wanted to learn to paint, I confessed to Claire as we walked to the artist's studio, a converted old barn near the town center. When I was young, I used to draw, but then life happened. Life happened. 3 simple words that encapsulated so many postponed dreams, so many untraveled paths. My marriage, my husband's premature death, raising Leo alone, the decades of hard work as a nurse, the constant sacrifices. Somewhere along that path, the young woman who dreamed of paints and canvases had disappeared, replaced by the practical woman who had no time for such frivolities. The course lasted 3 hours, during which a bearded, friendly artist named Giovanni taught us the basics of watercolor, how to wet the paper, how to mix colors, how to create different effects with salt, alcohol, and other materials. My first attempt to paint the small olive tree he had set up as a model was a disaster. The colors bled into each other, creating an unrecognizable smudge. "Don't worry," Giovanni laughed, noticing my frustration. "Watercolor is about acceptance. Acceptance of accidents, of imperfections. It's like life. You can try to control it, but in the end, it goes its own way." I was struck by the philosophical depth of his words. I looked again at my disastrous painting, and instead of shame, I felt a strange satisfaction. It was awful, yes, but it was mine. It was the result of my choices, of my attempts, of my mistakes, like my life. On the way back to the apartment, we passed a small art supply store. Without hesitation, I went in and bought a basic set of watercolors, brushes, and a block of proper paper. It was not a small investment for someone living on a modest stipend, but I felt it was important. A commitment to myself, to the Eleanor who wanted to create, not just consume, beauty. That evening, sitting on the small balcony of our apartment, I made my first independent attempt at painting. I chose as my subject the sliver of rolling hills we could see between the buildings, a simple strip of green and gold against the pink sunset sky. The result was even more disastrous than my attempt in class, but I didn't care. There was something deeply satisfying in the process, in the absolute concentration it demanded, in the way it made me forget everything except that present moment, that brush stroke, that color. When I finally put the brush down, I noticed Claire watching me from the balcony door, a soft smile on her face. "You look happy," she commented. I reflected on her words for a moment. Happy. It was a simple word, but one that had become strangely complex for me. When was the last time I had felt truly happy? Not just satisfied, not just fulfilling my duty, but genuinely happy as I felt in that moment, with paint on my hands and a colorful mess in front of me? "I am," I replied, surprised by the simple truth of that statement. I am really happy. Time in Tuscany began to flow at a different pace, slower, gentler, kinder. Days turned into weeks, weeks into months. And before I knew it, we were celebrating my 6th month in Italy. My Italian had improved significantly, now peppered with local expressions that made the elderly at the community center smile with approval. My skin, always pale, had taken on a golden hue from the long walks under the Tuscan sun. My hair, which for years I had kept in a severe bun, now fell in soft waves on my shoulders, the gray streaks shining in the sun like polished silver. But it wasn't just the external changes I noticed. There was an internal transformation happening, subtle as the tide imperceptibly advancing on the sand, until you suddenly realize you're in deeper water than you imagined. I found myself laughing more easily, worrying less, sleeping better. The heavy layers of guilt, obligation, and self-criticism that had accumulated over decades began to dissolve in the warm Tuscan air. My watercolors were also improving. They weren't masterpieces, certainly, but they had an honest quality that pleased me. Giovanni, the teacher from the initial course, became a friend and mentor, offering me advice and encouragement during our weekly classes, which I now attended regularly. "You have good eyes," he commented once, examining my painting of a twisted olive tree. "You see beyond the surface of things." His words moved me deeply, perhaps because for most of my life, I had focused only on the surface, on immediate needs, on practical responsibilities, ignoring the deeper currents flowing beneath my existence. It was Giovanni who suggested I participate in the small craft fair held on Sundays in the main town square. The idea of exposing my paintings to strangers terrified me, but at the same time, there was something irresistibly tempting about the proposal. "I'm not ready," I protested, feeling a blush rise to my face. "No one is ever really ready," he replied with a typically Italian shrug. "But sometimes we need to pretend we are, until one day we realize we're not pretending anymore." The following Sunday, there I was, with a small makeshift table where I displayed half a dozen simply framed watercolors. Countryside landscapes, olive trees, the cobblestone streets of the old town, a flowery courtyard glimpsed through a half-open gate. To my complete surprise, I sold 2 paintings in the first hour, one to a German couple on vacation and another to a local woman who said the view of the hills I had painted reminded her of her childhood. When I put the euros in my purse, I felt a surge of emotion so intense that I had to turn my face to hide the tears. It wasn't about the money, though it was welcome. It was about the validation, the recognition, the feeling that something I had created with my own hands was valuable to someone else. It was a completely different kind of connection from what I had experienced as a nurse, equally significant but in a new and unexpected way. It was at that fair that I met Arthur. He had a stall a few tables down from mine where he sold wooden sculptures, small boats, birds, abstract figures polished until they shone like silk. I noticed him watching my stall several times during the morning, and when the fair began to quiet down around noon, he approached with 2 cups of coffee in his calloused hands. "To celebrate your first sales," he said, handing me one of the cups with a shy smile. Arthur was about 75, I estimated, with abundant white hair framing a sun-weathered face marked by decades of smiles. His eyes were a deep brown, surprisingly young in contrast to his wrinkled skin. I accepted the coffee with a thank you, and so our conversation began. Arthur was a native of the region, a retired carpenter who had started sculpting wood to pass the time when back problems forced him to give up his trade. He had been married for 43 years until his wife passed away from cancer 5 years earlier. He had 2 children and 5 grandchildren, all living in the Florence area. "They always ask me to move closer to them," he said with a sigh. "But how can I leave the countryside? It's as much a part of me as my own blood." I understood perfectly what he meant. In just 6 months, Tuscany had also gotten into my blood. The golden light, the slower pace, the kindness of the locals, the sense of belonging that had gradually grown in me. Arthur and I started meeting regularly after that first Sunday, sometimes for coffee after the fair, other times for long walks in the countryside at sunset. He showed me hidden places that only the locals knew, small, isolated chapels among the hills, Etruscan ruins forgotten by tourist guides, the best spot to watch the sunset reflected on the landscape like a path of liquid gold. There was nothing explicitly romantic about our encounters, but there was a growing intimacy, a mutual comfort, an appreciation for each other's company that was, in its own way, a form of love, a mature, patient love. without the pressures or expectations of youth. A love that didn't need labels or definitions. On a starry night, sitting on a bench overlooking a valley as the evening breeze rustled the olive trees, Arthur took my hand. He said nothing. He just intertwined his calloused fingers with mine. The gesture was so simple, so natural, that there was no startle, no hesitation, just a silent acknowledgement of something we already knew. "Eleanor," he finally said, his voice mixing with the sound of the crickets. "Have you made plans for when your volunteer program ends?" The question took me by surprise. There were only 2 months left until the end of the 1-year program. Claire had already decided to return to the States, eager to see her grandchildren. I, however, had avoided thinking about the topic, fearing the decision I would have to make. "I don't know," I admitted, looking at our intertwined hands. "I've been thinking about it a lot lately." "Stay," Arthur said simply. It wasn't a plea or a demand, just a suggestion, an open door. Tuscany needs more painters with good eyes. His proposal hung in the air between us, full of possibilities. Stay. Such a simple word, but one that represented a monumental choice. To completely abandon my previous life, to make this temporary place my permanent home. And what would that mean for my relationship with Leo, with my past, with everything I knew? "I would need to think about it," I finally replied. "There are complications. My son, in the States." "I understand," Arthur said, squeezing my hand lightly. "I'm not asking for an answer now. I just wanted you to know that, for me, Tuscany would be more beautiful with you in it." That night marked a subtle shift in our relationship. We began to have dinner together regularly, often at the small farmhouse Arthur had inherited from his father a few miles from town. He cooked simple, delicious dishes. Fresh pasta with vegetables from his small garden, roasted chicken with rosemary, bean soup. I brought desserts and breads I was learning to make. On one of those evenings, after a particularly lovely dinner, Arthur showed me something he had kept hidden until then, a small workshop he had built in the back of the house where he worked on his sculptures. In the center of the simple but well-organized space was a piece covered by a cloth. "I've been working on this for weeks," he confessed, looking suddenly nervous. "It's for you." When he removed the cloth, I was speechless. It was an olive wood sculpture of a woman with wavy hair sitting on a rock, looking out at the hills. It wasn't a perfectly realistic representation, but it captured something essential: the posture, the contemplative gaze, a dignified serenity that, to my surprise, I recognized as my own. "This is how I see you," Arthur said softly, "strong like the olive tree, resilient to storms but still flexible, still growing even after so many years." I touched the sculpture with trembling fingers, feeling the smooth curves of the wood under my hands. It was such an intimate, personal gift, not expensive jewelry or something material, but an expression of how Arthur truly saw me. My eyes filled with tears. "No one has ever seen me like this before," I murmured. "Then they weren't really looking," he replied simply. That night, when Arthur took me home, we stood on the doorstep for a long moment. Then, with the naturalness of something inevitable, we kissed for the first time. A soft, unhurried kiss, filled with the mutual knowledge that we had all the time in the world, but also that, at our age, every moment was precious. The next morning, as I walked to the community center, I felt strangely light, as if something I didn't know I was carrying had been removed from my shoulders. I smiled at strangers on the street. I noticed the beauty of the wildflowers growing in the cracks of the sidewalks. I appreciated the impossible blue of the summer sky. At the center, I found Signora Maria waiting for me, as she did every Tuesday for her weekly blood pressure check. Her perceptive eyes examined me for a moment, and then she smiled, a knowing smile that made me blush like a teenager. "Love suits you," she commented casually as I wrapped the cuff around her thin arm. "It makes your eyes sparkle." I didn't deny it. What would be the point? At my age, I had learned that some feelings are too precious to be denied or hidden, especially when time feels increasingly valuable. That same day, I received an email from Leo. Although we talked on the phone every couple of weeks, our conversations tended to be superficial. Updates on the weather, on his job, on my paintings. We rarely touched on deeper or more painful topics. The email, however, was different, longer, more thoughtful. Leo wrote about the therapy he had started, about the painful discoveries he was making about himself, his patterns of behavior, and his relationship with me. I realized recently, he wrote, that I never really knew you, Mom. I only knew the version of you that existed in relation to me. And now, when I see your photos in the countryside, or those paintings you've shared, or just hear your voice on the phone, I realize there's a whole person there that I ignored for most of my life. His words moved me deeply. There was a sincerity in them that I had rarely seen in Leo, a vulnerability that reminded me of the boy he had been before the layers of protection and arrogance began to accumulate. Sophia and I are thinking of visiting Italy during the January holidays, the email continued. If you're open to it, we'd love to see the place that has made your voice sound so happy. I replied immediately with tears in my eyes, accepting their request to visit. After sending the email, I stared out the window of the small cafe where I had stopped to use the Wi-Fi, watching the comings and goings of people in the square, thinking about how life takes unexpected turns. When I met Arthur that evening, I told him about Leo's email and the planned visit. I'm nervous, I confessed, as we walked through an olive grove. We haven't seen each other in person since I left. So many things were left unsaid. Arthur considered my words for a moment. You know what I learned after so many years as a carpenter? He finally asked. That the most feared storms sometimes pass without causing damage, and other times they bring necessary changes. I smiled at his simple wisdom. You must have been a good carpenter. Only a man who learned to respect the power of things he can't control. He replied with a shrug. Like wood grain, like the weather, like children who grow up and follow their own paths. The new year arrived with cold winds sweeping through Tuscany, bringing a mild but persistent winter. The rolling hills, once bustling with tourists, were now practically empty, except for a few farmers and local residents like Arthur and me, who walked the damp paths every morning, indifferent to the weather. My volunteer program had officially ended, but the coordinator, impressed with my work, offered me the chance to stay on for another 6 months. I accepted without hesitation. The idea of returning to the States, even temporarily, seemed increasingly distant. In the first week of January, I received an email from Leo confirming their arrival. He and Sophia would be staying for 10 days, housed in a small pensione in the historic center, just a 15-minute walk from my apartment. The arrival date was in just 3 days. When I shut down the computer after replying, I felt a wave of anxiety hit me with unexpected force. 8 months had passed since our last farewell at the airport. 8 months during which I had changed so much, internally and externally, that sometimes I barely recognized myself. How would Leo see me now? How would I see him? Arthur, always sensitive to my mood changes, noticed my agitation when we met for dinner that night. You're worried about the visit, he observed as he poured me a glass of local red wine. I nodded, grateful for his perception that made explaining unnecessary. I'm afraid that when I see Leo, I'll go back to being who I was before. That woman who lived only to be his mother, who had no identity of her own. Arthur considered my words as he cut fresh bread, the aroma of rosemary filling the small, cozy kitchen. You can't go back to being who you were, he said finally, with the quiet confidence I so appreciated. Just as I can't go back to being the young carpenter I once was. Time changes us, Eleanor. Experiences transform us. Your old skin has been shed, like a snake that grows. His words were comforting, but the fear persisted. In the following days, I was seized by a nervous energy, I cleaned my small apartment until every surface shone. I bought enough food for a small army. I washed and ironed clothes I probably wouldn't even wear. The morning of their arrival, I woke before dawn, my heart beating rapidly like a trapped bird. I dressed carefully, choosing a light turquoise cotton dress I had bought at the local market, and gathered my now longer hair into a loose bun. Looking at myself in the mirror, I saw a woman who seemed simultaneously familiar and strange, more tanned, more relaxed, with expression lines that spoke of frequent smiles rather than constant worries. Arthur had offered to accompany me to the airport, but I decided this first meeting should be just between Leo, Sophia, and me. Some bridges needed to be rebuilt in private before I introduced them to the man who now held such a special place in my life. The small Florence airport was relatively quiet that January morning. I positioned myself near the arrivals exit, my eyes fixed on the automatic doors, my restless hands repeatedly smoothing the fabric of my dress. When I finally saw them, my heart leaped. Leo looked different, thinner, with a short, well-groomed beard he had never worn before, dressed more casually than I had ever seen him in public. Sophia was also transformed, her previously flawless appearance replaced by a simple elegance that suited her much better. We stood for a moment just looking at each other across the distance. Then Leo dropped his suitcase and walked quickly towards me, wrapping me in a tight hug that completely surprised me. I felt his body tremble slightly against mine, and I realized he was crying. "Mom, Mom," he murmured against my hair. "Mom, forgive me." Those simple words, spoken with such raw emotion, broke something inside me. I hugged him back with all the strength I could muster, my own tears now flowing freely. Sophia approached after a few moments, her eyes also shining with unshed tears. When Leo finally let me go, she hugged me too, a shorter but equally sincere embrace. "You look beautiful," she said, examining me with evident admiration. "Italy clearly suits you." The drive to the pensione where they would be staying was filled with superficial conversation about the flight, the weather in Italy compared to the States at this time of year, plans for the next few days. We carefully avoided the deeper, more painful topics, as if we had reached a tacit agreement that we first needed to reconnect as people before confronting the past. After helping them settle in, I suggested a late lunch at a small trattoria in the hills that had become one of my favorites. The place was simple but charming, with wooden tables worn by time and paper placemats instead of cloth. But the pasta was always fresh and delicious. During lunch, I observed Leo and Sophia with curiosity. There was a new dynamic between them, more balance, less tension. Leo truly listened when Sophia spoke, instead of just waiting for his turn to talk. And Sophia, in turn, showed a kindness towards him that I had never noticed before. After dessert, a regional orange tart they praised enthusiastically, Leo finally addressed the topic that had been floating between us. "Mom," he began, clearing his throat nervously, "I know we have a lot to talk about. Difficult things I did and said that now deeply embarrass me. But before all that, I want you to know that I've never seen you so radiant. You seem like a completely different person." "Not different," I corrected gently, "just more whole. As if parts of me that were dormant have finally woken up." Sophia leaned forward, her eyes meeting mine with a surprising intensity. "Eleanor, since you left, Leo and I have been through transformations, some easy, others painfully difficult. We sold the house, as you know. We moved into a small apartment. I went back to work, something I never thought I'd do." "It's amazing," Leo interjected, looking at his wife with obvious pride. "She got a job at an art gallery. She's studying art history at the university at night." Sophia's face lit up with a blush of pleasure. It was always my dream since I was a teenager, but my parents insisted on business, something practical, as they said. And then she married me and adopted my dreams instead of her own, Leo completed with evident regret. "Just like you did, Mom. It seems I have a talent for making the women in my life abandon their own dreams for what I want. There was a moment of silence as we absorbed the brutal honesty of his words. Then, to my own surprise, I began to laugh. Not a bitter or ironic laugh, but a genuinely amused one. "Look at the three of us now," I said, gesturing to our small group. "A son who is finally learning he's not the center of the universe, a daughter-in-law who is rediscovering her dreams, and a mother who started painting at 67 and found a lot of things she didn't expect." Something in my words or the tone of my voice made Leo look at me more attentively. "There's something else, isn't there?" he asked, his eyes searching my face. "Something you're not telling us." I took a sip of water, considering how to respond. This wasn't the moment I had planned to talk about Arthur, but I realized there was no reason to hide or postpone it. "Yes," I admitted, feeling a warmth rise to my face. "There's someone special, a man named Arthur, a retired carpenter who sculpts wood. He's become important to me." Sophia's eyes widened, and then she smiled, a genuine, warm smile that she had rarely directed at me before. "That's wonderful, Eleanor. We want to meet him." Leo's reaction was more restrained. He blinked several times, as if processing the information, and then frowned slightly. "You barely know him," he said finally. "How can you be sure he's trustworthy?" It was exactly the kind of reaction I had feared. The role reversal, the son becoming the protective father, questioning my decisions as if I were a reckless teenager. I took a deep breath, remembering Arthur's words about feared storms, sometimes passing without causing harm. At 68, Leo, I trust my judgment of people. Arthur is a good, honest, and kind man. He makes me happy. That should be enough. The next 3 days passed in a kind of enchanted bubble, as if Leo, Sophia, and I were together in an alternate version of our lives, free from the patterns and resentments that had defined us for so long. I showed them my favorite places in Tuscany, the small hidden cove where Arthur had taught me to swim, a skill I never acquired in the States, the cafe by the river where I wrote in my journal every morning, the community center where I still worked 3 days a week. Sophia was particularly enchanted by the craft fair where I sold my watercolors on Sundays. Leo, on the other hand, seemed fascinated by the simplicity and authenticity of local life, so different from the constant race for status and material possessions that had defined his previous existence. "People here seem genuinely happy," he observed as we walked through the town square after dinner on the 4th night of their visit, despite having so little compared to the standards I used to consider essential. "They have enough," I replied, thinking about how my own definition of enough had changed dramatically in recent months, and they have time to appreciate what they have. That makes all the difference. The next day, I would finally introduce them to Arthur. We had arranged for lunch at his small house in the countryside. I was nervous, more than I wanted to admit. 2 such different worlds were about to collide, my past and my present, perhaps my future. Arthur, sensing my anxiety when I arrived early to help with preparations, squeezed my hand gently. "They are a part of you," he said simply. "So they are already important to me, too." The simplicity and sincerity of his words dispelled some of my tension. I helped him prepare lunch, a traditional ribollita soup, rich with the aroma of vegetables and bread, accompanied by fresh cheeses and a simple salad from his small garden. For dessert, I had brought an orange cake made with fruit picked from the small community garden, where I sometimes worked on Saturdays. Leo and Sophia arrived punctually, bringing a bottle of local white wine they had carefully chosen after consulting the owner of the pensione, where they were staying. Arthur welcomed them at the door with the uncomplicated hospitality that was his hallmark, leading them to the small terrace where the table had been set simply but carefully. The first few minutes were filled with the usual formalities of any first encounter: compliments on the house, comments on the weather, polite questions about their trip. But gradually, as Arthur served the wine and we sat down to lunch, the conversation began to flow more naturally. To my surprise, it was Leo who really broke the ice, asking Arthur about his wood sculptures. Arthur's face lit up, as it always did when he talked about his art, and soon he was enthusiastically explaining the different woods, the tools he used, and the process of finding the shape that potentially existed in each piece of wood. It's as if the sculpture is already there, he explained, his calloused hands gesturing expressively. My job is just to remove what's extra, like life in a way, Sophia commented, surprising me with her insight. We remove what's not essential to reveal who we really are. Arthur looked at her with renewed respect. Exactly. That's precisely how I see it. During lunch, I watched with growing relief as the conversation flowed easily among the three of them. Arthur told stories of his days as a carpenter, of the challenges and beauties of the trade, of the transformations he had witnessed in the region over the decades. Leo talked about his new position as a store manager, about how he was learning to find satisfaction in honest work, even if it was less prestigious than his previous career. Sophia shared her enthusiasm for art history, her eyes shining as she described the Renaissance paintings she was studying. At no point did Arthur try to impress or show off. He was simply who he was, an honest, hard-working man deeply connected to nature and his roots, but also surprisingly philosophical and insightful. I saw Leo watching him with growing respect, especially when Arthur talked about sustainability and traditional building practices that respected the balance of the environment. After dessert, Arthur invited Leo to see his workshop in the back of the house, while Sophia and I remained on the terrace, enjoying the mild January sun. He's wonderful, Sophia said as soon as the men were out of earshot, genuine in a way we rarely encounter in our old social circle. Yes, I agreed, feeling a surge of affection as I thought of Arthur. He's taught me a lot about authenticity, about being true to yourself without apology. Sophia hesitated for a moment, playing with the rim of her wine glass. Can I ask you something personal? I nodded, curious. You two... are you thinking of staying here permanently? With him? The question hung in the air between us, full of implications. It was something Arthur and I had discussed only vaguely in late-night conversations by the fireside or while preparing dinner together. The possibility existed, not as a concrete plan, but as an idea that was slowly, organically growing, like one of the olive trees we so loved. I'm considering it, I finally admitted. I found something here I never had before, a sense of belonging to myself before belonging to anyone else. And Arthur? He accepts me exactly as I am, with no expectations or conditions. You deserve it, Sophia said with a sincerity that surprised me. After everything you did for Leo, for us, you deserve a life that is truly your own. Her words moved me deeply, more than I expected. For years, I had seen Sophia as an adversary, a cold, materialistic woman who didn't think I was good enough for her world. Now, for the first time, I felt a genuine connection with her, woman to woman, human being to human being. And you? I asked. Are you happy now, Sophia? Really happy? She considered the question seriously, looking out at the hills visible beyond the small terrace wall. I'm learning to be, she finally replied. It's strange. When we had everything, the big house, the expensive clothes, the trips, I was constantly anxious, constantly dissatisfied. Now, with our small apartment and our modest jobs, I feel a peace I've never experienced before. When Leo and Arthur returned from the workshop, I noticed immediately that something had changed. There was a new intimacy between them, as if they had shared something significant in their short absence. Leo was carrying something wrapped in a soft cloth, which he handed to me with an enigmatic smile. Arthur wanted me to give you this, he explained. Carefully, I unwrapped the package and found a small wooden sculpture, 3 stylized figures intertwined in an embrace, their forms flowing into one another like waves. It was abstract but unmistakably represented a family. He started making it the night he met you, Leo explained, his voice strangely emotional, and he finished it just yesterday. I looked at Arthur, who was watching my reaction with attentive eyes. "It's beautiful," I murmured, running my fingers over the polished surface of the wood. "As always, you saw something I didn't know was there." "What was always there," he replied softly. "It was love. Even when it was covered by hurts and misunderstandings, it never completely disappeared." That night, after Leo and Sophia had returned to their pensione, Arthur and I sat on the small terrace of his house, listening to the rhythmic sound of the wind in the trees. The small family sculpture rested on the table between us, illuminated by the soft light of an oil lamp. "What did you and Leo talk about in the workshop?" I finally asked, curious about the change I had noticed between them. Arthur smiled, his eyes reflecting the flickering light. "He asked me if my intentions with you were serious, as a good protective son should." I couldn't help but laugh at the irony of the situation. "And what did you tell him?" "The truth," Arthur said simply, "that with each passing day, I fall more in love with you, that I respect your independence and your choices, that I would never ask you to sacrifice anything for me, but that I would be very happy if you chose to share your life with me, for as long as you want." His words washed over me like gentle waves, each one bringing a new layer of emotion. It wasn't a formal proposal. It wasn't pressure or expectation. It was just a truth offered openly, without conditions or demands. "And what did Leo say?" I asked, my voice little more than a whisper. "He said he's never seen you as happy and alive as you are now, and that whoever was responsible for that had his eternal gratitude." Silent tears rolled down my face. Not tears of sadness, but of a deep, overwhelming gratitude for the unexpected journey life had given me. At 68, when many would consider life to be winding down, I was discovering just the beginning of something new and wonderful. The rest of Leo and Sophia's visit passed like a good dream. Days filled with long walks in the countryside, explorations of small villages, quiet meals washed down with wine, and conversations that stretched late into the night. Arthur often joined us, his quiet presence complementing our newfound family dynamic. On one of those nights, as we were dining in a small restaurant built inside a natural cave by a river, Leo finally broached the subject I knew had been on his mind since meeting Arthur. "Mom," he began, his voice soft but determined, "Sophia and I have been talking. We want you to know that we understand if you decide to stay here permanently." I felt my heart speed up. Although I had considered this possibility many times in recent months, hearing Leo verbalize it made it suddenly more real, more concrete. "I haven't made a final decision yet," I replied honestly. "But you're considering it," Sophia said, not as a question, but as a statement. I nodded, looking at the river visible through the cave's opening, its dark waters reflecting the moonlight. "Yes, I'm considering it. I found a peace here that I've never known before. And Arthur." I paused, searching for the right words. Arthur sees me in a way no one has ever seen me before. Leo covered my hand with his, a gesture so reminiscent of his father that I felt a lump in my chest. He sees the incredible woman you've always been, Mom. The woman that I, in my selfishness, never allowed myself to fully see. Tears burned in my eyes, but I didn't let them fall. This moment wasn't about pain or regret, but about acceptance and possibilities. "If you decide to stay," Leo continued, "we want you to know that you will always have a home with us in the States whenever you want to visit. And maybe we can come here once a year, maybe during the summer holidays, when the grandchild we're expecting is old enough to travel." For a moment, I thought I had misheard. "Grandchild?" I repeated, looking from Leo to Sophia, who was now smiling broadly, one hand resting protectively on her still flat stomach. "We're expecting a baby," Sophia confirmed, her eyes shining. "We just found out a week before we came. I'm 10 weeks along." A wave of emotion washed over me, so intense that for a moment I couldn't breathe. A grandchild, a new beginning, a new life, a link that would connect all the generations of our small family. A baby, I finally repeated, my voice choked. "I'm going to be a grandmother." Leo squeezed my hand. "Yes, you are. And we want you to be a part of his or her life no matter where you choose to live." The news of Sophia's pregnancy subtly altered the tone of the last few days of their visit. Now, there was a new element in our conversations. Plans for the future. Discussions about names. Speculation about what this new family member would be like. I began to see Leo and Sophia with different eyes, not just as a couple trying to rebuild their relationship, but as future parents about to embark on the same transformative journey I had experienced decades ago. On the eve of their departure, as we walked along a riverbank at sunset, Leo asked me something I didn't expect. "Do you think it was a mistake?" he questioned suddenly, his voice so low it was almost lost in the sound of the water. "I mean, you had to sacrifice so much because of me. If you could go back, would you still choose to have me?" I stopped, turning to face him completely. "Leo," I said firmly, "never for a second were you a mistake. The decisions I made after you were born, the sacrifices, the priorities I set, some were right, some were wrong. But you, yourself, were the best thing that ever happened to me." His eyes filled with tears. "Even after everything I did, the way I treated you?" "You're my son," I replied simply. "Not the perfect son, just as I wasn't the perfect mother. We're human, imperfect, learning as we go. But the love I have for you was never in doubt, not for a moment." He nodded, discreetly wiping his eyes. "That's how I want to be as a father. To love unconditionally, but not at the cost of myself. To set healthy boundaries, to teach my child to be independent. You'll be a great father," I said with conviction, "because you're willing to learn from mistakes, yours and mine." The next morning, when I accompanied them to the airport for their departure, the farewell was different from 8 months ago. There was no fear or uncertainty, only a sweet melancholy mixed with the promise of future reunions. I hugged Leo for a long time, then Sophia, my hand resting briefly on her belly, still showing no sign of the life growing inside. "Keep me updated on every detail of the pregnancy," I requested. "I want to know everything." "We promise," Sophia replied. "And will you keep us updated on your plans?" I understood the unasked question. They wanted to know if I had made my decision to stay in Italy permanently. "I'll be thinking a lot in the coming months," I answered honestly. "And whatever my decision, you'll be the first to know." As I watched the plane take off, carrying my son and daughter-in-law back to the States, I felt a strange mix of emotions. There was a slight sadness, of course, but not the overwhelming pain I had feared. Instead, a sense of fullness prevailed, of cycles closing and opening simultaneously. Arthur was waiting for me in the airport parking lot. His face lit up when he saw me approach. I didn't need to say anything. He just opened his arms and I walked into them, finding the comfort that was now so familiar to me. "Did they leave well?" he asked as he drove back to the small town we now called home. "Yes," I replied, watching the familiar landscape pass by the window. The rolling hills, the olive groves, the occasional glimpse of the distant river. It was a good visit, a good goodbye. "Not a final goodbye," Arthur observed perceptively. "No," I agreed, just a see you soon. With a baby on the way, there will be many reunions in our future. In the following months, I established a new routine. 3 days a week, I worked at the community center, now as the activities coordinator for the elderly. 2 days I painted, my technique constantly improving under Giovanni's patient guidance. On weekends, I divided my time between the craft fair and long explorations with Arthur. Small villages in the interior, hidden waterfalls, Etruscan ruins lost in time. My rented apartment was starting to feel more and more like a permanent home. Small objects collected on my walks, interesting stones, river-polished glass, a piece of driftwood shaped like a heart, decorated the shelves. My own paintings, now simply framed, adorned the walls. A small herb garden grew in pots on the balcony. The weekly calls with Leo and Sophia became a cherished ritual. I watched through the computer screen as Sophia's belly gradually grew, her face taking on that characteristic glow of pregnancy. Leo seemed calmer, more centered, as if the prospect of fatherhood had finally anchored something within him that had always been adrift. It was during one of those video calls when Sophia was in her 7th month that they gave me the news. "It's a girl," Leo announced, his face radiant with joy. "We're having a daughter. A granddaughter." The word resonated within me like music. A little girl who would carry a piece of me in her genes, in her blood, in her history. "We've already chosen a name," Sophia continued, exchanging a knowing look with Leo. "We'd like to name her Eleanor, after you. They wanted to give their daughter my name." The emotion was so overwhelming that I couldn't speak for several moments. "Only if you approve, of course," Leo added, interpreting my silence as hesitation. "It's perfect," I finally managed to say, tears rolling freely down my face. "It's the most beautiful gift you could ever give me." That night, sitting with Arthur on his small terrace, watching the starry sky over the hills, I shared the news and my growing certainty about the future. "They're going to name the baby Eleanor," I told him, still marveling at the honor. "My granddaughter will carry my name." Arthur smiled, intertwining his fingers with mine. "A beautiful name for what I'm sure will be a beautiful girl, just like her grandmother." We sat in silence for a while, just listening to the crickets and feeling the gentle summer night breeze. Then, taking a deep breath, I shared the decision that had been forming in my heart in recent weeks. "I want to stay here," I said simply, "in Italy, with you, but I also want to visit the States regularly to see my granddaughter grow up. I want to be present in her life, even from a distance." Arthur squeezed my hand, his dark eyes reflecting the stars. "We can make it work. Nowadays, there are so many ways to stay connected, and we can always travel to the States together a couple of times a year." "Together," I repeated, savoring the word. "Does that mean you'd be willing to meet my family in the States? My granddaughter?" "Eleanor," he said, with the tenderness that always made my heart race. "I want to know all the parts of you, your past, your present, and if you'll let me, your future." 3 months later, I was at the Florence airport again, but this time not for a farewell. Arthur and I were boarding a flight to the States, where my granddaughter, little Eleanor, had just been born, 2 weeks ahead of schedule. Small, but perfect in every way. The journey was long and exhausting for our aging bodies, but the fatigue vanished instantly when we entered the hospital room, and I saw Leo holding a small bundle in pink blankets. With trembling hands, I received my granddaughter for the first time, looking at her perfect little face, her curious eyes, her tiny fingers that instinctively gripped my finger when I offered it. "She's beautiful," I whispered, feeling her light, precious weight in my arms. "Perfect." Arthur was by my side, his eyes misty as he looked at the baby. "She has your eyes," he observed softly, "the same eyes that made me fall in love with you." During the 2 weeks we spent in the States, we established a new family dynamic. Arthur was warmly welcomed by Leo and Sophia, who seemed genuinely happy for me, for us. Little Eleanor was passed from arm to arm, receiving the love of all the generations gathered around her. One afternoon, while Sophia was resting and Leo had gone out to buy diapers, I was left alone with my granddaughter, rocking her gently in the rocking chair in the nursery they had prepared for her. Arthur had gone for a walk to give us this moment alone. "Do you know your grandmother used to be afraid to live?" I murmured to her as her tiny eyes fought against sleep. For a long time, I thought it was too late to start over, too late for dreams, for love, for adventures. I kissed her soft forehead, inhaling that indescribable baby smell. But it's never too late, little Eleanor. That's the most important lesson I want you to learn from your grandmother. It's never, ever too late to discover who you really are. The day of our departure back to Italy, there were no tears of sadness, only promises of frequent reunions. We set up a schedule of visits. We would come to the States twice a year, and Leo, Sophia, and little Eleanor would visit us in Italy during the summer holidays. Grandma is going to teach you how to paint when you're a little older, I promised my granddaughter, as I held her one last time before leaving for the airport. And Nono Arthur will show you how to find the most beautiful stones by the river. On the plane, as we flew over the Atlantic towards our adopted home, Arthur took my hand on the armrest. His eyes met mine, full of that quiet, certain love that had become my safe harbor. "Happy?" he asked simply. I looked out the plane window at the endless ocean below, thinking of all the paths that had brought me to this moment. The choices, the sacrifices, the mistakes, the late discoveries. I thought of the young Eleanor, who dreamed of seeing the world, of the mother who postponed her dreams for her son, of the middle-aged woman who forgot who she was, and finally, of the old woman who found the courage to rediscover herself when everyone said it was too late. "Yes," I replied, squeezing his hand, deeply happy. As the plane flew on through the clouds, I realized I had come full circle, not by returning to the starting point, but by arriving at a new place that somehow was exactly where I was meant to be. At 69, I wasn't at the end of my story, but just beginning a new chapter, a chapter filled with love, art, hillsides, and a granddaughter who would grow up knowing that her grandmother had the courage to follow her own path, even when everyone said it was too late. And it is never, ever too late. Now, if you enjoyed this story, click on the next video appearing on the screen, because in it, you'll find a story of betrayal and revenge like you've never seen before.